It's sometimes said that history is written by the victors, and so when we think of history, we get a pretty biased view typically. And one fact of our very recent history, by recent I mean of the last couple of centuries, is the dominance of the Western world, especially the dominance of the North Atlantic world, of Britain, Western Europe, and the United States over the rest of the world. And so it's not by coincidence that much of world history in recent decades has been written from the perspective of the West. That is the perspective of the Roman Empire, or the dominance of the West, or the inevitability of the triumph of the West. For us, that's quite ironic because we're precisely in the era where world power, world economy, world influence, geopolitics, technology are all being rebalanced in a much more multipolar world, and certainly with the rise of very powerful nations in Asia, such as China and India, and with a rebalancing of our understanding of history itself. Now, in this class, we're going to talk about the classical age, but of the east of Eurasia. And the first point to make is that this story has been undertold, underemphasized in the Western world, as it has written its history from the perspective of the victors, that is, the temporary victors of the last couple of centuries. But the history of the classic age of the eastern and southern parts of Eurasia are, of course, absolutely vast. And the starting point for us to remember is that most of the world population in most of world history has lived in Asia, not in Western Europe or not in the combined west of the North Atlantic region, but in Asia. It's not surprising, therefore, that when we look at the classical age in the East, we're seeing a vast part of the human history and a story of magnificent achievements, of great complexity, and of absolute fascination for us today. So we discussed in the previous class the classical age of Greece and Rome. Now we consider the classical age across the East. But that by itself is an absolutely vast expanse, and so it's a complex story. Perhaps a starting point for considering how complex and vast it is that the Roman Empire itself, in its final 2 centuries, divided between the Western Roman Empire with capital in Rome and the Eastern Roman Empire with its capital most of the time in Constantinople, today's Istanbul. Even the territory of the Roman Empire was so vast and the population so different in needs, in culture, in social organization, that the Roman Empire could only be governed by 2 capitals. This meant that when the Roman Empire of the West fell to the German conquering tribes in 476 AD, the Roman Empire of the East, with its capital in Constantinople, continued and would continue for another 1,000 years. So when we talk about the end of the Roman Empire, we have to be careful. The empire based in Rome, which was the western half, did fall in 476, but the Roman Empire of the East, based in Constantinople, or today's Istanbul, would continue for another 1,000 years, and that means a continuation of the Greek and the Roman culture continuing to play an enormous role. But 1,000 years later, the Eastern Roman Empire finally fell to the Ottoman Turks, and another major part of humanity, the Turkic peoples, came to rule over large parts of the former Roman Empire and large parts of the today's Middle East, Arabia, and North Africa. And so other peoples and with deep traditions and distinctive cultures emerged. And this is the story that we have in great complexity across the east of Eurasia. The Turkic peoples, the Mongols, who would create the largest contiguous empire in the history of humanity, emerging from today's Mongolia to conquer most of Eurasia, reaching right into Western Europe, conquering much of today's Russia, conquering much or most of today's China, conquering the lands of Central Asia, creating a vast empire and a Pax Mongolica, a Mongolian peace, which enabled vast east-west trade along the steppeland highways, the horse-bearing highways of the medieval period. Of course, we will visit and come to understand the great empires of India, and we will also come to learn about and understand a bit about the great dynasties of China, from the contemporaneous Han Dynasty that traded with the Roman Empire to the successor dynasties, the Tang and Song dynasties, the Yuan dynasty ruled by the Mongols, the Ming and the Qing dynasties, this great history of China during the classical age is also part of our story. There's a lot that we can only begin to explore in our class of understanding this long and great history of the Eastern empires. First is to better appreciate the balance of West and East in the long history of humanity, because we will again need to rethink our history as we move from a Western-dominated world of the 19th and 20th centuries to a much more balanced and much more multipolar world in the 21st century. We'll need to think hard about the great variation of political structures and political institutions and political cultures across this region, because the different empires gave rise to very different political cultures that have a persistence until today. Until today in the West, we look back to the democracies of the ancient Greek city-states. But in the East, the traditions are to look back to the great unified empires and dynasties of China, ruled by a spirit of harmony given by Confucian philosophy. So major differences in the organization of politics, the organization of power, and the philosophy of power. We need to understand much more clearly than we do today how the history of large imperial states differed from west to east. In the West, when the Roman Empire collapsed or was defeated in 476 AD, Western Europe never again was to unify under one political system. Up to the partial exception of today's European Union, which is an attempt to recreate a kind of union largely of the territories of what was the Western Roman Empire. But between 476 AD and today, there never was again a single state that had the dominance of the Roman Empire. Whereas in China, China unified in 221 BC in the Qin dynasty. And while there were certainly periods of civil war and internal disarray, there were very long periods of unity of the vast Chinese state and Chinese civilization. And this has given rise to a very different outlook about statecraft, about the nature of war and peace, about the ability to create a harmonious political society that stretches over a vast land and a vast population and many different ethnicities. So the histories of West and East differ, and this gives rise until today to differences in outlook about what is possible in power and in politics and in governance. Now, as always, with every age of globalization that we consider, I want you to understand where your society was, your location, your community during this period. Who ruled? How was it ruled? Was it part of an empire? Was it part of local village confederations? What was the history of your own region during this period of the classical age? Well, to understand the Eastern classical age, we're going to visit some of the most iconic sites in the vast stretch of Asia. We will, of course, visit Constantinople, today's Istanbul, of course, one of the great centers of culture and civilization in the world today. We will see one of the most wondrous architectural achievements of all of human history, the great Christian cathedral of Hagia Sophia, built during the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantine's new capital of Constantinople, and then after the Ottoman conquest in 1453, becoming the great mosque of Hagia Sophia during the Ottoman rule. We will visit Central Asia, because it was in Central Asia, along the highways of the steppelands, where great empires arose: the Mongol Empire, the Timurid Empire of Tamerlane, or Timur the Great, in today's Samarkand in Uzbekistan, and see the wonders of the classic civilizations of Central Asia. And of course, we will visit the Great Wall of China and understand the long, remarkable and unique history of Chinese civilization, its distinctive geography, its distinctive statecraft, its distinctive philosophical traditions that last until today. So we've got a lot to see. Let's go have a look.